In a country where we spend over $67 billion annually on education, you would think that with so much money spent, we would be one of the best educational countries, right? Wrong. When you start to look at the rank and the growth of our country's educational system, you can really see why our educational system is failing. We as citizens of the United States have to put pressure on schools and teachers in order to change our failing educational system. One reason our educational system is failing is because we have a hard time competing against other developed nations. When you start to look at the ranking of test scores in the US, we aren't even top 10 in educational proficiency. In fact, according to Mark Dozer, an educational assistant in the research studies of Brown College, he puts us at 14th in overall educational proficiency. But that's not the only thing we fall behind in. We rank 6th in math skills, 23rd in science, and on top of that, we rank 24th in literacy. These rankings come from the standard test scores in over 55 developed nations. The reason we rank so high in these educational categories comes down to the educational growth rate. According to Jake Luntz, an educational development analyst for Statistic that looks at the cognitive skill development from year to year in educational test scoring, we can see that the progress that we once had in education from year to year has slowed down. Compared to countries like China, Germany, and the UK, that have a consistent growth rate of 27% in educational development from 2014 to 2015. The US, on the other hand, has just a growth rate of just 15%. Pretty sad. Before the 21st century, our educational growth rate was about 23%. An even more shocking statistic shows that in the last 2 to 3 year span, the educational growth rate has decreased by over 2%. This slide looks at two different pictures that focus on both educational growth rates, one from the 21st and one from the 20th century. The first picture looks at the educational development now. The second picture looks at the educational development in the past, before the 21st century. From the pictures, you can tell that the 21st century development in education has significantly dropped compared to the 20th century educational development. A study from Dr. Deanna Wenzel, the Commissioner of Connecticut's Educational Department in 2009, looked at the test scores from two different school districts. One school came from a district that was heavily funded, another from a poorer funded school district. She concluded in the study that the school with the lower funding gave almost the exact same test scores compared to the school with the better funding. When she looked into the schools, she found out that teachers on both ends of the school districts were both given incentives for their training and test preparations. This study shows that the allocation of resources by funding played little to no part in the students' overall test scores. She determined that one factor that led to better test scores came down to how the teachers were motivated. When looking at other schools that did not provide incentives for teachers, test scores were significantly lower, without motivation attached to them. A study from Dr. David Ross, an educational analyst from the Harvard Business School, agrees that when it comes to new programs and new educational support systems, a lot of time teachers and students take years to figure out how those systems work. A recent study by Dr. David Ross from the Harvard University looked at a panel of 9 educational analysts and asked them why their educational scores were so low in the US compared to other countries. Over half the panel agreed that one reason educational scores were low were based off the idea that over the last 30 years as a country we have implemented more than 120 new educational support programs, almost 4 times the number of programs any other country has added in that time frame. Many of these programs, like the No Child Left Behind program, have billions and billions of dollars put into them every year. In fact, a statistic from the Educational Department in 2006 showed that $23.5 billion of the educational budget, which is $67 billion, is allocated just to No Child Left Behind programs. Most of the $25.3 billion that was made for training and preparation for the teachers. But in many cases, teachers were not given adequate training for their programs. The panel of 9 experts from Dr. Ross's study Some, being teachers, agreed that little to no training was offered for the 120 new programs that were first implemented. Or if the government gave trainings for teachers, the teachers were unmotivated to learn the new programs that they were given. When we have new programs implemented in school districts, we have to prepare teachers for these programs. Megan Carrick, a reading specialist out of the DC area, said that one way to do so is to better equip the teachers. One way to do that is to provide incentives for all teachers in schools taking training classes. Megan says, instead of penalizing school districts for doing bad, we need to encourage growth by giving incentives for doing good. When we have motivated teachers that are willing to teach, that's when we see test scores and growth improvement in school districts. When you start to look at all these problems in the educational system, whether it's ranking, growth, or lack of teacher preparation, we need to find a solution. As the Educational Department said in a statement during the State of the Union in 2009, education is not a quick fix. We need to take time, work together. When it comes to Congress, we need to all come together and work on a common idea and common goal for the educational crisis. One way to do that is by putting pressure on K-12 institutions. In order to solve the problems we face, the pressure the public needs to put on the institutions has to show that the system we have is not working, and that the money we are spending on these programs needs to be allocated in a better way. I'm not attacking the No Child Left Behind program. It might be the right program that we need. But when we have a program that catches teachers, parents, and even students off guard, we can expect these kinds of results. We need to take the $25.3 billion that we put into No Child Left Behind and put that money to good use. Making sure teachers are motivated translates to better test scores for students, and that's something we cannot argue. I'm calling to action all teachers, all students, and all institutions. I'm not against spending money. I'm not against No Child Left Behind. I think that if we really need to spend the $67 billion on education, then let's do it. But make sure that every penny spent goes to the proper training, incentives for the teachers, and good educational plans that make a difference in the educational system. We aren't going to grow by just sitting put. We have to call to action. Like Dr. Ross said from Harvard, we need to motivate. We need to work on preparing teachers for these programs. Instead of expecting results from unmotivated, unprepared students, we have to prepare them for the future ahead. That's the only way our country can be great. That's the only way our country's education can be great. Thank you very much.